Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.
Kimar Roach, and I listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast.
See, this is what happens when you put yourself on mute to begin a show. You know, imagine I started with ho ho ho, season's greetings, Merry Christmas, only to look at the screen and realize I was on mute, and I'm not even going to edit that. I'm going to leave that silence in. People, happy 25th of December for those who celebrate. For those who don't celebrate, we had to drop some content. Can't stop, won't stop. This isn't Christmas for everybody, you know. Not everybody celebrates Christmas and so on and so forth. Why am I recording on Christmas Day? Some of you will ask. You'll be like, Mash, come on. It's family time. It's time to be with those that you love. It's time to drink up, be merry, and all of that jazz. Well, what I have to tell you is a Caribbean tale as long as day. At the time of recording, about 24 hours ago. So I'm supposed to be at my uncle's. I'm actually going to be there in the next 2 hours or so, maybe 3 hours. And my uncle rang me and he was like, yes, Ute. Make sure you're around my house for 1 p.m. on Christmas Day. See when he told me that, I just kissed my teeth because I knew that 1 p.m. really means 7 p.m. And I knew that no food in a Jamaican household is surely being served at 1 o'clock on Christmas Day. There's absolutely no way food was going to be ready by 1 o'clock. So I rang him about half an hour ago and I said, so what are we saying? Food time? He said he just woke up. So with that said and done, people, I said, you know what? Let me just relax myself. Rather than go and watch Home Alone 1 and 2, let me just record some content for the people then on Christmas Day. So this is dropping for your viewing pleasure. Obviously, for those of you who catch up with this on the audio podcast, by the time you listen to this, hopefully it's still 2022 by the time I drop this on the audio podcast. But let's just go through the admin as usual, people. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the ticker tape below. We're on the road to 4K YouTube subscribers. At the time of recording, with 5 or 6 days to go before 2023 hits us, we are on 3,917 YouTube subscribers. People, 83 more. Can we get 83 more before we hit 2023? The challenge is set. Let's try hit that 4K before 2023, and then we move in 2023. If you obviously aren't watching on YouTube, well, go follow us on YouTube anyways and hit that subscribe button, hit like, share, subscribe. All of that helps the algorithms. If you're new to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, you can follow us at Twitter, at Instagram, and the handle is at Carib Cricket on Twitter and Instagram. We are also on Facebook. Just search Caribbean Cricket Podcast. It's a private group, but I let everybody in. I only chuck you out if you spam and swear or do any kind of foolishness in the group. But touch wood, everything's been fine thus far on the Caribbean Cricket Podcast Facebook group. And of course, the website, www.caribbeancricketpodcast.com. If you want to become a patron and support the Caribbean Cricket Podcast in this time of merriness and giving and presence, then go to www.patreon.com/Carib Cricket. Thanks to anybody, or all those, I should say, who have become patrons in the last 2 weeks or so. Your support is always welcome. I always reach out to everybody who becomes a patron and send you a thank you message. Ultimately, on Patreon, if there's anything that you want us to include in our content, do feel free to message me. You can send us an email as well, caribcricket@gmail.com, if you just want to chat about whatever. If you've got any ideas about what we do on the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. So without any further ado, why have I, beyond the why, the fact that I've just got available, like 2 hours available to just quickly record something now. The other reason why I wanted to record something is, yesterday on Christmas Eve of all days. Remember, people, there's never a quiet day in West Indies cricket. News was dropped on the Cricket West Indies website. And for those of you who are yet to take it in, let me just read it out. Not the whole thing verbatim, but we got to chew this one up. We got to chew it up. Here it is. Cricket West Indies today. Remember, this was on the 24th of December. So at the time of recording, this was yesterday, Christmas Eve. Cricket West Indies today announced a new innovation for the long format of the game, with the addition of a triangular red ball tournament to start at the end of the West Indies Championship in April 2023. The new Headley-Weekes series will feature 3 matches and 3 teams. Team Headley and Team Weekes will be selected from the best performers in the 2023 West Indies Championship and players outside the starting West Indies Test 11. The new West Indies Academy will provide the 3rd team in the new series. Team Headley and Team Weekes are named in honour of West Indies pioneers and legendary batting greats George Headley and Sir Everton Weekes, whose names are also honoured on the trophy for the winners of the West Indies Championship. The matches will be played from 18th of April to 6th of May at the Coolidge Cricket Ground in Antigua. Before that, the 2023 edition of West Indies Championship will be played across 5 rounds of 4-day red ball cricket featuring the 6 regional franchise teams. Defending champs Barbados Pride, Guyana Harper Eagles, Jamaica Scorpions, Leeward Islands Hurricanes, Trinidad and Tobago Red Force, and Windward Islands Volcanoes. The 2023 West Indies Championship commences in February. The first 2 rounds will be played from 1st of Feb to 11th of Feb in Grenada at the National Stadium and in Antigua at the Coolidge Cricket Ground and the Sir Viv Ground. There will then be a break and the tournament will resume on the 15th of March and run until the 1st of April for the final 3 rounds, which will take place in Trinidad, after which the champions will be crowned and presented with the Headley-Weekes trophy. Johnny Grave, CEO of Cricket West Indies, said, "We are delighted to unveil the Headley-Weekes series, which is a new idea that will extend the 4-day season, create more opportunities for our players to showcase their skills, and will be a huge incentive for them to strive towards selection into our A team and ultimately our test team. It will also provide some strong competitive red ball cricket for our new West Indies Academy players as we continue to try to ensure that the next generation of players are being prepared along the pathway to international cricket. Whilst the West Indies Championship is once again going to be played on a 1-round 5-match basis, with the plans we have for our A team and academy to go on overseas tours after the Headley-Weekes series, we expect our best players in the region will still play at least 10 4-day games in the first half of next year." That's quite lengthy, people, and I wanted to read out the full kind of press release because I think for those who've read it, you've possibly not taken it all in, and this is ultimately the point of this particular episode, video, etc. of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I want to kind of look at that press release in detail and look at what it kind of says and what it means for Cricket West Indies or West Indies cricket, for want of a better terminology. Now, I've seen a few reactions to this already. On one hand, some people are saying, "Oh, this is welcome news," and I think the people who are saying welcome news possibly haven't looked at it in totality, or maybe they have and they still think it's welcome news. On the other hand, there's those who are saying this is yet another nail in the coffin for red ball cricket and test cricket vis-a-vis the West Indies. How can West Indies only have a 5-round 4-day championship? And there's merits in both arguments for me. So what I quickly want to do on this Christmas Day is just kind of chop it up. There's still lots more probably to come out. I think Johnny Grave will probably front in the media and try and explain it a bit more. We'll try and get Johnny Grave on the show. Johnny's probably listening to this, watching this, so I'll reach out to Johnny and try to get him on the show to break this down a bit more. But I'm going to try and just give kind of like my first gut reaction, gut instincts to this announcement. Let's deal with the negatives first and foremost, because I do think there are some significant positives, but I want to deal with the negatives first and foremost. And I think the negatives are fairly obvious for those who will say it's a negative. Okay, I'll give my opinion at the very end, but I'm going to try and just balance this out. The negatives are that we've stuck with a 5-round 4-day championship. When the 4-day championship resumed in March this year, because remember, for those who've forgotten, West Indies and essentially the West Indies Test players hadn't had any domestic red ball cricket since February 2020. when the pandemic hit, red ball cricket in the Caribbean essentially went on shutdown from February 2022 to February 2020 to March 2022. So we had a 2-year fallow period of no red ball cricket domestically in the region. And I always have to remind people of this because I think people forget that any kind of assessment you make of West Indies' fortunes over the last 2 years, you have to factor in that during the pandemic, our cricket went on shutdown domestically. Not that our standards are high, but our cricket went on shutdown. Anyways, the 4-day championship returned in March 2022. And when it returned, we were told that we're only going to have a 5-round 4-day championship because it's March 2022. Logistically, we're coming out of a pandemic. The only way to really make this work is, I think they hosted it in Antigua and Trinidad then as well. They said the only way to make this work is to have a shortened tournament so that our players can just get some form of cricket. And for those of you who are students of the domestic game in the Caribbean, you should remember that that was kind of like the rationale given. We all assumed that when the 4-day championship returned as normal in 2023, so we are due to kick off again on the 1st of February, which is the norm. And well, naturally, the norm is usually that we start just before Christmas. Or I can't remember now, actually. Do we start just before Christmas and then kind of end in the first half of the year? Anyways, we knew that the 4-day championship was going to return in February 2023. We'd seen some inklings in the press. And we just assumed, and when I say we, I mean us at the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, myself and Santoki, we assumed through the kind of inklings we were picking up in the media and from the kind of stakeholders, we're going to go back to a 10-round championship. And hopefully we assumed that the West Indies Academy might get some involvement. However, as per the press release I've just read out, the decision has been made to stick with a 5-round championship. A 5-round championship. So each team plays each other once only. Now, the pandemic is quote unquote over, right? I totally get why there would be a negative reaction to this. I get why people would say, well, hold on. 5 rounds only isn't enough for our players to develop their red ball game. Yes, I know there's club cricket, but when we talk about the best standards in our region, we're talking about the regional competitions. So how does 5 rounds help our budding red ball players develop? And I agree that that's not enough. That can't be enough. And yes, I know obviously there's more to the statement and there's now a Headley-Weekes competition, but what that Headley-Weekes competition says is that there'll be 2 teams, Team Headley, Team Weekes, and the West Indies Academy, which I do think is great, but I'll get onto that later. They will all play each other once, right? And then I guess they'll decide a winner out of that, okay? So what you're basically saying is your very best red ball players in the region will play 7 matches at most within the Caribbean in terms of our regional competition. I know Johnny has said that then there's a potential 18 tours and then an academy tour, which I don't deny. So then maybe they'll play some more games. But forget the tours for a moment because they haven't been announced. On the face of it, only the best players will play 7 games. And I can totally understand why people would look at that and say, I don't agree with that. That's not enough. That's not enough cricket for our best players to play to enhance our red ball cricket. So that's the negatives. That's the negatives. I agree. I agree in so much as I understand the nature of the arguments for the negative side to this. However, I do think there are some positives and some quite significant positives. Positive number 1 is that the West Indies Academy are going to play some games. Now, ideally, the very best players in the West Indies Academy will already be playing for their home franchise. So let me take, for example, someone like a Teddy Bishop, right? Yes, he's part of the West Indies Academy, but all things being well, he should already be part of the Windward Islands Volcanoes, the Windward Islands Volcanoes 4-day championship side anyway, and then he'll get an extra 2 games as part. I assume he would then go back to the West Indies Academy, and he would get an extra 2 games playing for the West Indies Academy as well. So the very best players in the West Indies Academy, hopefully, are going to get 7 games within the Red Bull Championship, 5 or 4 or whatever it might be with their domestic franchise, and an extra 2 playing in the Headley-Weekes series at the end of the tournament. I assume that there was no other financially viable way to get the West Indies Academy into the tournament otherwise. Remember, the start of the tournament is in Grenada and and in Antigua. The end of the tournament is in Trinidad. I remember with West Indies cricket, you always have to consider the financial elements of all decision making. We are not flush with cash. And I know some of you will say, oh, they've got to find a way to make the money work. But remember, we're have-nots. We're part of the have-nots in world cricket. We are not flushed with cash to just say, let's just make sure the West Indies Academy side can play in the tournament and travel to Grenada and then travel to Trinidad and then come back to Antigua. That doesn't necessarily mean we got all the money for that. Okay? But at least they're getting some involvement in this tournament. So that's a positive. The second positive is this. I actually think when you kind of take the emotion out of the decision making and take the kind of gut instinct reaction to it all, to me, there is huge merit in streamlining the competition at the end. So it's the flip side to the negative, right? The negative that I've outlined is they're only playing 5 matches. So the majority of players are only going to play 5 matches in the Red Bull Championship, right? But when you add this Headley-Weekes series on at the end, so the extra 2 matches, where effectively it's the best, 22 players plus some reserves, so let's say 24. It's the best 24 players and the West Indies Academy in a kind of tri-series at the end, and a 4-day tri-series as well. It's not like a 1-day match. It's a set of 3 4-day matches at the end. I actually like this idea. And the reason why I like it is you are effectively saying to the domestic players, if you want to be involved in that 4-day tri-series at the end of the tournament, showcase your ability. You've got 5 rounds with your domestic franchise. If you truly believe you are a top-tier Red Bull player, you'll show it in that 5-round championship, and that will then get you eligibility to be selected for the Headley-Weekes series at the end of the 4-day championship, where it's the 22-24 best Red Bull players in the region going head-to-head against each other. I like that idea. I do like that idea because effectively you're saying you've almost given what I call a performance incentive with the Headley-Weekes series. So there is some benefit to this idea. I would still much prefer a 10-round 4-day championship series, and I still think we need to get some clear explanation as to why they decided to go down this route and not the 10-round championship. But I like this idea of streamlining it after 5 rounds and saying those who performed get rewarded, and you move on to almost like an all-star Headley versus Weekes tri-series. So I do like that. And then on top of that, I like the fact, but the key to this is it must come to fruition. I like the fact that CWI or Johnny Grave, who's fronted up in front of the media and in the press release, has said, this will then allow us to work out who goes on our A-team tour, whoever they've got it planned for. Like I say, I'm going to try and get Johnny on the program. Assuming Johnny listens to this, Johnny, I'll reach out. Let's try and get you on the program and talk about this in a bit more detail. But I like this idea that it's essentially five rounds of the 4-day, streamlined, cut off, only the best go through to the Headley-Weekes series. And then from there, cut off, only the best go through to the A-team tour against whoever they play, and also the Academy tour. So I do think there's pros and cons to all of this. And what it also should mean as well, the A-team tour that comes later in the summer, whatever West Indies have got planned, it should be much easier to turn round to the region and the media and say, these are the 15 players selected for the A-team tour, and they've all, largely speaking, come from the Headley-Weekes series. Why? Because the Headley-Weekes series was formed of the best 24 players in the region anyway. And I think no one could mess with that. No one could F with that and say, what's your rationale? How comes my man and my man have gone on to the A-team tour? Well, actually, they've gone on to the A-team tour because they made it through to the Headley-Weekes Tri-Series. So I think that kind of streamlined nature of deciding the best talent, I like that idea. So for me, when I kind of break it down, there's some obvious cons. I think there's some obvious pros if you look at the kind of situation in detail. But the last thing I think we should add as well, and this isn't necessarily to do with the cons or the pros, this is to do with context. At the end of the day, we're now going into, after the South Africa series ends, so South Africa series ends in early March in terms of the test series, or mid-March, right? Sorry, not mid-March, early March. I think the South Africa series, test series, ends in early March. And then we've got the rest of the 4-day championship and then the Headley-Weekes series, so on and so forth. So I assume some of the test players might even be involved in all of this, right? Now, we have to remember that for the rest of the year after that South Africa series, we have only 2 more test matches for the year. So by the time the West Indies Red Ball Championship is done, we would have already played 2/3 of our test matches for the year. All we'll have left after that is India, when India come to the Caribbean, I think in June. I think it's June/July to play the test, the ODIs and the T20s. So for all of those people who will undoubtedly look at this and go, what are Cricket West Indies doing? You're mashing up cricket. You're not focusing on red ball. Well, there's a context to say, why should we play a 10-round Red Ball Championship that would normally end after we've already played 2/3 of our test matches for the year? It don't make no financial sense. Where's the financial viability in doing that? We only have 2 more test matches after March, and that's India in June, and then we're just done for the whole year. So really and truly, people have to look at context and say, West Indies plays 6 test matches in 2023. Why would you pay for and organize a 10-round Red Ball Championship when in reality, Red Ball Championship for what? Our test match cricket is done pretty much by March. So it makes sense when you think of it like that to then streamline, because in theory, when you streamline, by the time India turn up in the summer for what will more than likely be a lick down series, you are legitimately turning around to the Caribbean media and people and cricket heads and saying, well, we've actually selected the best side we can select, because we had a streamlined Red Ball Championship. We then streamlined it for Headley-Weekes series. We then streamlined that for A-team tour. So technically, we know who our best players are to play against India. So when I kind of stepped back and I looked at it all, I was like, well, actually, financially, it doesn't make sense for a 10-round championship this year. Context-wise, it doesn't make sense for a 10-round championship this year. And that's not Cricket West Indies' fault. You have to go back to the ICC and the decision makers. You can't tell a cricket organisation like Cricket West Indies to run a 10. Well, you can tell them, you can shout till the hills and you can say they're not doing it properly. But you can't say run a 10-round Red Ball Championship for no red ball cricket when we're not actually playing any cricket. So the wider issue here isn't so much why are Cricket West Indies only running a 5-round Red Ball Championship and then a Headley-Weekes series and da-da-da-da-da. The wider issue here is, what is the purpose of Test cricket, full stop? Don't have a go and say, why is the tournament shorter? There's no Test cricket to play, people. Test cricket's almost done after South Africa. Our championship starts on the 1st of February. South Africa Test series is done early March. So come on, step back, look at it, analyze it. There's some method in the madness. Anyways, people, Christmas Day, ho, ho, ho. I've been Mashal St. Patrick here at One Half the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. If you've got free time on Christmas Day like I have because dinner ain't ready, Christmas food ain't on the table yet. If you got time like me, let me know. Get in the comments below. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me know your thoughts about this topic on the Cricket West, the announcement about the new Cricket West Indies Red Ball Championship. If you're listening to this on Twitter, hopefully before the end of 2023, Listen, I could have tried to make no reference to Christmas, people, but it is what it is. But if you are listening on Twitter or Twitter, why did I say Twitter? If you're listening on the podcast app of your choosing, you can at us at Carib Cricket. Let me know your thoughts on the particular episode. But enjoy the rest of your Christmas day, people. I'm Mashal St. Patrick here on half the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. As ever, stay locked in for yet more content. Oh, sorry, last thing before I wrap up. Head to our Twitter page, people. We are now accepting the nominations for the 2022 Caribbean Cricket Podcast Awards. So just to quickly run down that's the men's Test Batter of 2022 and bowler, the men's ODI batter and bowler of 2022, the men's T20 batter and bowler 2022, the women's ODI batter and bowler 2022, and T20s, obviously. And then the big three awards, the Shining Star of 2022, the Moment of 2022, and the Catfish of 2022. So do head over to our Twitter page at Carib Cricket, send in your nominations, because we do have the big live Caribbean Cricket Podcast Award show to round off 2022. All we want as many contributions as possible before we hand out the winning gongs to the respective West Indians. I've been Mashal St. Patrick here on half the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Stay locked in as ever, people. Peace.
We rule the cricket world. Now the rule seems coming.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.